This is the Fantasy Football Fellowship Podcast, where we unpack fantasy, faith, and life. I'm Bryce Johnson with Pastor Trip Smith, and we are your fantasy coaches here to encourage you and help you win while you play fantasy football with purpose. As we provide fantasy advice, we won't always be right, but we hope we'll be convincing. We're coming to you live from the Unpacking It Ministry studio here in Charlotte, North Carolina. And today we are unpacking some of the latest news in the fantasy world. What were our initial thoughts from some preseason action? And then what players are we already changing our minds on? Who are we getting excited about? Who are we cooling off on? And today's breakout topic is about considering. What do you consider when making draft selections? What's most important? And then we'll take a look in life and in our faith. How do we make decisions and what do we consider? And there are actually some verses in the Bible that talk about consider this or consider. And so we're going to unpack that today on the show as well. And so we're excited for today's show as we get closer and closer to fantasy drafts and also to the start of the NFL season. And I did want to announce today on the show that we have opened up the fantasy leagues that you can join to compete against Trip and I. All right. So Unpacking It Ministries is the ministry that Fantasy Football Fellowship is a part of. And Unpacking It Ministries runs 3 different leagues or formats that you can participate in. All right. So as a listener, as someone a part of Fantasy Football Fellowship, you can join one of our leagues by going to unpackingit.com/fantasy. And so one of the really unique leagues, we started it this season. You have $250 salary cap. You pick 20 players, any 20 players, as long as they fit that salary cap. Each player has a specific salary that has been assigned to that player. And so it's a ton of fun. And then put together the perfect roster and go win. We'll play best ball throughout the season. All right. So there's that league. We also have an auction best ball league where we'll do a live auction. And so you can compete against Trip and I during that live auction. So again, go to unpackingit.com/fantasy. And then we've got one other kind of standard PPR league as well to be a part of. So we're excited about that. And here we go. So another exciting fantasy season is underway. And with the preseason starting, we're starting to get some glimpses. We're starting to see some of these rookies. And I just did the Unpacking It podcast all about sort of who's standing out, who's turning our heads. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that on this podcast today. But let's say hello to Trip. Trip, how are you? What's going on, man?
Bryce, I'm here. I'm excited, man. Yeah, fun to watch a little bit of preseason football. I tuned in, I think, for almost all of the first quarters that were televised. I wanted to see those players who were starting, and it is fun to, start to see some real football that looks real. Some of the things that we've been hearing out of training camp, to see if those play out on the field at all. You can't take too much away from those preseason games, but if you're hearing something that the players and coaches are saying, and then you're seeing those highlights from beat reporters that are at training camp, and then that gets confirmed when those starters of that first team is on the field of a preseason game, I think you can start to put together sort of some themes that will help you in your draft, and maybe identify some of those breakout and sleeper players before your league mates do.
Absolutely. And what's crazy about preseason too is some of these teams or certain positional situations that we've been talking about the last few weeks that we're wrestling with. Because there are some teams where things are pretty solid. Like we kind of know the pecking order. We know what teams are all about. We feel fine about that. And then we sort of determine, okay, where are they at in rankings and when do I want to draft them? But then, like we've talked about with the Jaguars, with the Titans, it's wide open. It's like, wait, now Travis Etienne's the guy. So now we've gone back and forth for the last 4 weeks. We've gone back and forth. And the fantasy community has done that. And then with the Titans, same thing. Going back and forth. Well, now, with Tyjae Spears being banged up, does Tony Pollard go up draft boards a little bit? Or do we just kind of calm down and go, all right, Spears should be back for week 1. But does this mean that he's an injury-prone guy? Because now we've seen him pop up with some injuries the last couple of years. So how confident do we then get in? I like Tony Pollard. So I'm like finding reasons to draft him. I want to get him. So I'm hoping that we kind of keep him at a decent ADP and go snag him. And then, for me, I've already drafted one team, and this was at the end of July. Well, things have changed over the last couple of weeks. So here, let me tell you about a couple players that I've changed my mind on. The Rams, I'm concerned about with Matthew Stafford in the back.
Yep.
It's like
one. Me too. Very concerned.
I mean, we're talking about a 37-year-old back pain. It's not good.
One of the team reporters asked McVay yesterday if surgery was on the table for Matthew Stafford.
Come on.
And his words were something like, that's not a subject that we have broached yet. That makes me really worried. He was supposed to practice on Monday. I haven't heard if he practiced today, but it sounded like he was not going to. And you rightly pointed out last week that Jimmy Garoppolo is the backup, and he is a serviceable backup quarterback in the NFL. So I don't think that it craters the value of every Rams player. I think that we'll talk about him a little later in the episode, but I think Kyron Williams will be okay. And I think Puka Nacua will still demand a lot of volume, high target share. The player that it worries me the most for is Devontae Adams, because
no chemistry. They haven't developed it.
No chemistry. He at this point, Puka is better than Devontae. Puka's going to get the lion's share. McVay highlights him in their offense when he is healthy. But also, Devontae Adams came to this team because he wants to be on a Super Bowl contending team. He's hopping around from team to team looking for somebody that's going to make it into the postseason and have a viable path to win another championship. And I question how all in Devontae Adams will be if Jimmy Garoppolo is the quarterback for the majority of the season with the Rams.
Yeah, and even Stetson Bennett looked okay.
Yeah.
And so in McVay, and I trust them and all that. But for me, I drafted Adams. Now, again, it's 14 team keepers, all that. But I took him in the second round.
Right.
Would I take him in the second round if I was drafting this weekend? No, I wouldn't. So that's where I'm like a little bummed by that. Where I'm still fine with Adams, and he's still talented. We know what he can do. But that's one of my disappointments at this point. The other player that I've soured on a little bit is Jaden Reed. Him being banged up. Not ideal. And I think you're all in now on Matthew Golden.
I'm all in on Matthew Golden. Even before Jaden Reed's injury, it sounds like Jaden Reed is most likely not going to be ready for week 1. Even still, I think Romeo Doubs was, I'm going to go ahead and say it. Romeo Doubs, I think, was the wide receiver 2. They want him on the field. He's kind of Mr. sort of steady.
Yeah.
He's a guy that you can trust in a PPR league. Matthew Golden is their wide receiver 1. The way that Jordan Love talks about Matthew Golden, he's the wide receiver 1 right now, and he has every opportunity to sort of seize that job and seize sort of the leading role in that passing offense. And the preseason game, he was out there with the first team for, I think it was 1 series. He had 2 catches. He drew a pass interference from Sauce Gardner. He had Sauce Gardner beat, which is, if you know anything about the real NFL, he's one of the best cornerbacks in the NFL. So I think that Matthew Golden, I'm going to say that Matthew Golden will be a top 24 wide receiver this season. And if you want me to go a little spicier, I'm going to say that Matthew Golden will be a top, I'll go 20. I'm not ready to go 18. I think he's going to be somewhere around wide receiver 20 this year. And for where he's being drafted, that's a value. That's a guy that I want on my team. I think he's going to be the best receiver on the Green Bay Packers, basically from the outset.
Yeah. Since I drafted early, I took Jaden Reed before Matthew Golden. And so I'm regretting that mistake. Now, across the board, my draft, I feel pretty good because Drake May, we love what they're doing in New England. Things are very positive with the Patriots. That was a team that I know I jumped on the bandwagon at the start of this, once Vrabel got there. I'm a huge Vrabel fan. And so Drake May is my starting quarterback on a fantasy team. I'm that excited about it. I'm liking the hype for Demario Douglas. And then I just talked about this on the Unpacking It podcast today, but who's turning heads? Travion Henderson. That guy's awesome. So he's still going a little early in drafts, I think. And now he's going to be second, third rounder probably in the next couple of weeks if he keeps this momentum going. And you might be concerned about Stevenson. Are you worried about? See, I'm not worried about Stevenson.
A little bit, because he was still. I mean, Stevenson was getting most of the carries with the first team offense out there, and that supposedly, I think they were doing. They were practicing with the Commanders this week, and Stevenson was running as sort of the power running back most of the time when the first team was out there. And those practices with other teams are a little bit more legit. You get a better idea of what their offense is going to look like. I think that with Travion Henderson and I think probably RJ Harvey with the Denver Broncos, I sort of think that they're getting drafted. They're going to get drafted a little bit too high. Everybody's excited about those rookies. They both look dynamic on the field. And I think J.K. Dobbins will eat into Harvey's workload early in the season. I think Ramondre Stevenson, possibly through the entire season, will limit Travion's carries. Now, if he gets 6 targets a game, because apparently he's running as like a wide receiver in some of their sets and catching a lot of passes. But those are guys I want to trade for RJ Harvey around week 5 or 6. Okay. Because I think,
I don't know if he'll be that long. I think he'll be in there before that.
You think so?
Yeah.
I think that the way J.K. Dobbins looked at the beginning of the season last year, and still he started to have those nagging injuries that he seems to always have. And Dobbins looked good the couple of carries that he got in that preseason game. So I think it's going to be kind of a true committee between those two guys early in the season. But you might be right. It might be more like week 3 or 4 with Travion Henderson. The second, if I don't have him on my team, the second that Ramondre Steven fumbles the first time, which will happen, it will happen. As soon as he has his first fumble, I'm putting in an offer to trade for Travion Henderson, because I think if Stevenson has a couple of fumbles in the first 5 games of the season, he could be a total afterthought, and Travion could run away with that job.
Let's just say, compare it to Montgomery and Gibbs, and if Henderson is more like Gibbs, there's still it's like when he touches the ball, he's gone. So he doesn't have to have a ton of volume to be a difference maker. Now, will he really go all the way up to a second rounder? That probably is too early, but if you can get Henderson at a reasonable spot in your draft, he's an easy click. He's an easy click. Yeah. He's awesome.
He's an exciting player. He's the kind of guy, I heard him compared to Gibbs on another a podcast that I was listening to, where if you remember Gibbs' rookie season, first few games of the year,
drafted him.
You kind of maybe I made a mistake here. He's not getting enough volume. And then Montgomery, I think, either missed a game or was just, he was hurt a little bit. So he wasn't at full strength. And Gibbs he never looked back. He never left the field after that. And all he needs is one breakaway play. And you've got your 12 to 15 points that you need for your week in that player, that fantasy. So
so I'm in on those guys. So we're getting to see some of the rookies. Ted McMillan, I think he's now going to get some more hype, and I was already a little worried about drafting him because I felt like, we're really expecting him kind of you're drafting him almost at his ceiling a little bit, and I'm always nervous about that with rookie wide receivers. Because even last year, like with Marvin Harrison, he ended up having a pretty good year, but you drafted him at his ceiling in the 2nd round. And so I'm afraid that if McMillan is drafted that way too, we have to be careful with that. However, here's the thing. The Panthers have multiple receivers.
Right.
I think that's why I drafted Bryce Young. I think he's going to have a great year, and he's got multiple guys to throw to, and Tet will be key. And sure, he dropped a touchdown. Don't worry about that. As I'll never forget, I was on this show ripping Jamar Chase for dropping passes during preseason. So never again will I do that, because now he's the number 1 fantasy guy. So I'm not worried about Tet. I'm just worried about maybe him getting too much hype, too much hype. So that's the thing with the preseason. We have to be careful, because guys start getting all the hype, and then they get overdrafted, and then the value goes away.
Yeah.
And the expectations change.
One thing to add with the Panthers, you're right. I think Bryce Young is he is going to have every opportunity to succeed. He has 2 seasoned, savvy wide receivers in Adam Thielen, and we forget this guy.
Fresh.
This isn't a guy that you want on your fantasy football team, but Hunter Renfrow has a long career of just being a reliable PPR sort of safety outlet for a quarterback. And then they have Tet McMillan, but also we were excited about the athleticism of Xavier Legette last year. Okay, again, I'm not sure that I want Xavier Legette on my fantasy team,
just my boxing.
But I
team.
think that I think that's right. Yeah, he'll fight somebody for his team. The Panthers offense will be better this year than it was last year. It will be serviceable from a fantasy perspective. And so that also makes me feel really good about Chuba Hubbard, where he's being drafted right now around the running back 20. He's going around RB 20. I feel great if I have Chuba Hubbard as my second running back on my team. So that's another one where I think he's got some sneaky value, where he's got a chance to perform 3-5 slots ahead of where you're drafting him as a running back. And that's what you're looking for with those guys in the early rounds.
Absolutely. So speaking of kind of early rounds, and we're going to talk more specifically about our draft strategies, but just kind of overall, any injuries or kind of narratives so far through the first couple of weeks of training camp and preseason and all that have maybe changed your draft plans or confirmed your draft plans?
I mean, I think this is probably true every year, but it seems like there are these backfields. You just mentioned the Jaguars. I think the Jets is looking like it's going to be I'm not drafting Breece Hall. Okay.
But I want Braylon Allen.
Right. I want Braylon Allen.
And
actually this guy, Isaiah Davis, is playing the third downs. He played last year.
Yeah,
he played last year. It's not a guy you're excited about from a fantasy perspective. They could have 3 running backs that are in the mix. Same thing with the Jaguars. Because there seem to be so many backfields that are in flux, I want to make sure that I have locked down my second solid running back by like round 4 at the latest. You know me, and in particular, I get excited about wide receivers, and I'm willing to take 1 running back and 3 great receivers early in the draft. But this year, like, I'm looking at Chuba Hubbard there in like the 3rd round or something like that. I want to have my second reliable running back, with the understanding that injuries can always derail your running back plans. But it just seems like there are, we're going to talk later about Javonte Williams. There are these backfields that I am nervous about how messy they seem to be. And so I want to get a guy that I know is going to get the lion's share of the carries for his team.
Yes, because of the uncertainty, if you can grab 1 or 2 running backs that are certain, that helps in a big way. It makes a difference, because otherwise, you're stuck with 5 guys and it's a toss up, and maybe you hit on 2 of them, but a lot of uncertainty there. So one of those backfields too, I'm all in on the Steelers this year. I think they're going to be better than anticipated. So I like the value for Steelers players. That's why I drafted DK Metcalf. I'm intrigued by some of their other young receivers potentially too, but really Jaylen Warren is the value at this point, because he's being overlooked. He's not the cool new guy. He's sort of post hype, because I used to love him. Like, I was, Jaylen Warren, just give him a chance. And he just never has really gotten over the hump. But it seems like this is going to be the year where he really gets that chance. Caleb Johnson hasn't burst onto the scene. We haven't gotten the same hype out of Steelers camp that we've had from Omarion Hampton and Travion Henderson and even Jaden Blue with Dallas before he got injured. So I think we're a little we're softer on excitement for Johnson, which means Jaylen Warren's the guy to snag.
Jaylen Warren is sitting there as running back 32 in ADP, and I think he has a chance to be a low end RB2.
Yep.
And definitely a flex running back.
Definitely.
Caleb Johnson did not look good in their preseason game. He doesn't catch passes. Okay. And maybe most importantly, what you're hearing about his lack of pass protection. He is not a good pass protector. And when you've got a 75-year-old quarterback with an Achilles injury in your backfield, that is really, really important. So the narrative with Warren has always been, if he gets the chance to be the lead running back, he has the athletic ability and the skill to put up great numbers. We've seen that in little bursts. So the question is, can he carry that load for an entire season? But I would love to take Warren around like the 30th running back off the board and have him as my like RB3. Man, I'm getting excited about these teams with Chuba Hubbard as a second running back and Warren as a third running back. I think that I can feel really good about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And people keep talking about Aaron Rodgers loves to dump off to his running backs.
Yes.
So that's another key thing there. So, all right, there's plenty of news going on. I'll try to cover a few things, and we'll get to some more of kind of opinions that have changed.
Are you excited about the new Taylor Swift album?
Well, I was intrigued though that she's going on Travis Kelce's podcast. That's intriguing.
As I've always said on this show, there's only one football podcast that's better than our podcast, and of course, it's New Heights, the Kelce brothers. And she announced today that she's announcing tomorrow her new album.
There we go.
So Travis, I'm going to call him Travis Swift this season. Former Kansas City Chiefs tight end who is now Taylor Swift's trophy boyfriend, and they'll be announcing the album. So that's probably the biggest biggest Chiefs news of the week, I would say, is the new album that's coming.
I did not include that on today's show notes, so that was a curveball for me. But I did see the headline earlier, so I'm not totally in the dark.
You got daughters, man. Come on, you have a wife. You got to know about this stuff.
No, we're not big Taylor Swift
Taylor
people.
fans.
No.
What I will say is I am more and more buying into the Chiefs down year narrative that we have talked about in previous episodes. I just think that Travis Kelce, he's just playing for the playoffs at this point. It's Super Bowl or bust for Travis Kelce. His life is great. He's having a great time with his brother and his cereal commercials and his celebrity girlfriend. He seems super happy. I gotta bring the
cereal into the office. I got the cereal.
You got the cereal. Okay, yeah, bring that next
cereal.
time. Oh, bring that next time. He is having a great time. And I don't think that he's going to be a great fantasy tight end this season. But
the value for Mahomes, I think, is worth considering. If he's there middle rounds, and you like to feel comfortable having a good quarterback, you don't want to take the risk because it's risky. We talked about it last week. You go later and you get a guy like Drake May or Caleb Williams or some of the second year guys. Mahomes could be okay.
I think he'll be better for his draft value than last season. He'll just be reliable. He'll just be reliable. But I'm not sure they're going to have a few blow up games. They still have an offense that's full of great players. But I think more and more I'm into the down year narrative, and I'm nervous about some of these players that we don't know what to think about. Guys like Rashee Rice with his suspension. Guys like Hollywood Brown.
Oh, he's always injured.
I was excited about him earlier in the preseason, and now I just don't know what to think.
But that division, I think, is what is so tough for me because the Chargers are legit. Like, they're going to be tough again. The Broncos are legit. They're going to be good again. And now Pete Carroll's with the Raiders, and I'm all in on Ashton Genty. So that's the thing with every week, the AFC West, those are going to be some tough matchups. So hopefully we're seeing a bunch of scoring, a bunch of fantasy points in those matchups.
Some really fun games. Yeah.
So I'm intrigued by Mahomes. That'd be the one guy on the Chiefs that I'll probably target. And Brashard Smith is my deep sleeper running back. So keep an eye out for him. Had some nice highlights in practice. Didn't do a lot in the preseason game. Not much room to move. So we got to get kind of their full lineup out there before we fully judge him. So we'd love to know your thoughts. You can leave comments if you're watching live right now. I know many of you listen later on the podcast, which we appreciate, but love having the interaction live right now. So if you are listening on Facebook or YouTube or Twitter, leave your comments. We'll try to get to those questions and thoughts throughout the show. All right. Each week on the Fantasy Football Fellowship podcast, we do a segment we call The Breakout. And basically we take a fantasy concept. We relate it to the Bible. We relate it to life. And this is a part of the Fantasy Football Fellowship ministry framework that all season long, we encourage fantasy leagues to get together and have a league meeting and discuss the weekly breakout. And so we send that to you through email, and then you read it on our website, fantasyfootballfellowship.com. So you read it, you can listen to the podcast, watch the podcast, and then discuss the questions that we provide your league leader. And you can have these conversations all season long, fantasy, faith, and life. And so get your league signed up for free, fantasyfootballfellowship.com. Either your current league or start a league, or if you just as an individual want to enjoy the content all season long, check out fantasyfootballfellowship.com. All right, so today, as we look at our drafts and begin preparing for our drafts, the question is, what do you consider? And what do you consider most when drafting? What do you look at? What do you analyze? And so, there are many fantasy managers that show up and they look at their, especially if it's an online draft, they just take the best guy that's still available according to ESPN rankings. But you're better than that. So what do you do? What do you do? What do you consider? Do you consider, ADP? Are you going to wait on certain players because you know that throughout drafts, they're going a little bit later? Or do you reach for players? Do you consider maybe the ADP and go, I don't want to wait on that guy. I got to make sure I get him now before he goes to another team? Do you consider age? Do you consider bye weeks? Do you consider, to what extent what a player did last season? Or are you a little bit more, start fresh? It's a new season. I'm just considering their current situation. I'm not as worried about last year's numbers. Or do you really emphasize that and say, hey, whatever you did last year, the last 4 weeks, do you consider last 4 weeks? Or do you look at, what a player did the first 4 weeks last year? And that's what you're basing it on. So there are so many things to consider. So what do you consider? And I'll ask you that, Trip.
It's a great question and an important one to think about this time of year. I think that the number one thing that I'm thinking about when I'm trying to find breakouts and sleepers is teams who I believe that their offensive situation has dramatically improved. So there are these players that we're optimistic about, we're excited about when they come into the league. We know that they're dynamic athletes, they're receivers who earn targets, they're running backs who have the skills to break plays, and they get stuck on these teams that are not good teams. And so we sort of, our opinion on them changes, we forget about them, and then they draft a quarterback who turns out to play well. I mean, the classic example last year is the Commanders. And if you could have seen what Jaden Daniels was going to do to that offense, then you could have gotten ahead of the Terry McLaurin breakout. You could have seen some of these exciting players coming for that team. So for me this year, I'm looking at the Tennessee Titans. I'm not saying that Cam Ward is going to be this year's Jaden Daniels. Okay. But he doesn't have to be. That team's offense was terrible last season. It was just the Will Levis experiment. You can say what you will about Levis. I think he was probably injured for most of the season. They're trying to patch it together with Mason Rudolph and backup quarterbacks. And Cam Ward, I think, is going to be a sort of mediocre to solid starting quarterback in the NFL. Maybe not right out of the gate, but within a few weeks. And so we've talked about Calvin Ridley on this podcast. I think that Ridley, even with the solid seasons that he's had in years past, I think he is going to have a huge season. I'm getting more and more excited about him. The ship has sailed on drafting him really low. Like he was in like the late 20s in ADP, and he's just creeping up and up and up. And I still think that even as like a wide receiver 2, there's room for upside there. So I'm looking at teams whose offensive situations have, I think, improved significantly. I might put the Jets and Garrett Wilson's situation in there as well. So I think that Garrett Wilson is probably going a little bit too low for what I think that offense is going to be capable of. Justin Fields looked like his passes were decent in the preseason, and that's all that I want to see for Wilson to be, I think, a wide receiver 1, a solid wide receiver 1 this season.
Yeah, I'll echo the excitement for Fields and Garrett Wilson. But when it comes to kind of what you're talking about, the coaching situation is so key for me. So I really consider, the situation that they're in based on the head coach and offensive coordinator. I want to feel really good about that. And especially when you know what to expect, because some of these unknown coaches and how are, there's an unknown with Ben Johnson now as the head coach. Mm-hmm. And then of course the ripple effects with the Lions. And so I'm very concerned that the Lions have a new offensive coordinator. I love the Lions. I love Jahmyr Gibbs. I love Dan Campbell, but I am considering maybe they take a step back this year. So I'm not as high on Jared Goff this year as I was last year. One thing that I do not consider is bye weeks. I think this is an overrated thing. All right, I got to worry about the bye weeks. It's August. I'm not worried about bye weeks 7 weeks from now. I just can't focus on that. I'm not going to pass on a player. Now, it's kind of silly to have 2 quarterbacks that have the same bye week, so maybe you look at that. Yeah. But like running backs, I'm not concerned about that because the chances are one of my guys will be injured. I'm going to have to play a bench guy. I'll figure it out. I want to get the best talent. I want to get the best players that I can. One thing that I do value that I think we absolutely need to consider is age. And as I consider my roster, I don't want to be all young and I don't want to be all old. I want a combination of young guys, old guys. And so like my first team that I've drafted, I have young running backs, which young running backs are key. And then I have a couple veteran wide receivers. I have DK Metcalf, Devontae Adams, even Nico Collins is we've seen him do it. He's proven himself. The only young wide receiver I have is Keon Coleman. So I took one flyer at wide receiver. But for the most part, I got my veterans at wide receiver, my young guys at running back. And so I'm considering age in a big way. I'm also considering, volume. Is this guy going to be a big part of the offense? You got to have opportunity. So you got to consider that. I'm not necessarily worried about like team schedules as much, like strength of schedule. That bit me in the past. And so I got away from that. But I do consider injury history. If a guy has a history, meaning one thing after another, I am avoiding that guy. And I consider that in a big way. So any of those things that you need to add to jump in?
I mean, I love that you mentioned Nico Collins, right? There's a difference between a guy who had one significant injury, but prior to that had been pretty reliable, And so actually, if you look at what Nico was doing before he got hurt last year, he was on pace to be the best wide receiver in the NFL. And you still might be able to get a value there if he slips in your draft a little bit versus these guys who are just always hurt. There's always something going on with their hamstring or their groin or recurring foot issues. So yeah, that's a really important one for me. I don't expect a player who comes into the season with an injury or like Chris Godwin. How long have we been waiting for Chris Godwin's true breakout? Because he's always hurt. He's hurt coming into the season. He's hurt during the season. So yeah, that's an important consideration as well.
So the other thing to mention is, what analysts and experts and fantasy gurus are you counting on and considering their rankings, their thoughts hopefully you throw us in the mix. Hey, you listen to Trip and consider what he says.
Me.
That's part of what
Bryce,
you factor in.
I don't want to be held responsible for the.
It was funny. I was watching NFL Network's fantasy show, it's pretty fun. But they were joking how, hey, we're giving you advice so you can blame us instead of yourself.
That's good.
That's
exactly right. Yeah. You need someone else to.
It's like, I drafted this guy because this analyst told me that.
Yeah, every year I love to blame Pat Fitzmaurice for Fantasy Pros for my own bad takes.
That's right.
Because he convinces me. I'm like, yeah, it's great to have someone else to be your scapegoat. But yeah, it is. I mean, especially guys who are digging into kind of the second level stats. I mean, one of my favorite stats with receivers is how many targets did they earn last year that were uncatchable targets, right? So that's a stat that you can actually go out there and find on something like Pro Football Reference. These receivers who they were earning targets and they were getting really bad passes from, Chris Olave before he got sent to the hospital by one of those off target, was earning a large target share. So that's some of those experts who really dig into those next level analytics. I think are pretty fun to kind of learn from their process.
Well, and then identify the ones that you really align with. It's like, okay, he feels good about these 3 players that I also feel good about. So what does he say about these other 3 guys? Because it's like, if we're viewing things similarly, maybe we're on the same page. And so I try to find those, analysts and fantasy guys to sort of, okay, I like this guy, not this guy. We think way differently. So I'm going to sort of disregard his stuff. And so in some ways that is confirmation bias, but I think that's kind of part of the fantasy. Like, you got to go with your gut and then confirm it with wiser fantasy, analysts as well to say, okay, wait, am I thinking this right? Okay, cool. He's thinking that way too. All right. Now I must be on the right path. Sometimes we're wrong, but ideally, yeah, you get those ones that you trust. So you consider their rankings, their analysis. With all that said, as we make fantasy decisions during the draft and this concept of considering, what do we consider? What about in our own lives? What do we consider when making decisions in life? And, where do we turn? What do we look to? And do we consider wise counsel? Who are we listening to when we're considering making a decision? Do we consider what God's word says when we're making decisions? And do we consider how our choices affect others? How selfish are we in our decision making, or how, selfless, and considering, wait, okay, if I do this, this is affecting, this person and that person. Do we think about consequences? Do we consider consequences when making decisions? Do we factor in the lessons learned from past experience? Are we intentional about that? Do we examine really what we value most and what our goals are? And do we consider, kind of the vision that we have for our lives? And hopefully that's aligned with the vision that God has for our lives. And are we actually considering that when we're making decisions? Or too often are we just flying by the seat of our pants and willy-nilly, and we're not really making wise choices and evaluating and considering in the right ways. And so, when we, in fantasy, neglect to really evaluate our choices and instead just, hastily making our picks and willy-nilly just, I'll take this guy, he's on the top of the automatic ESPN rankings list. Well, oftentimes our teams are going to lead us toward a tough season, an unnecessarily tough season. If we would have just paused, considered a couple things and gone, wait, no, I got to consider this guy's always injured. I'm not going to draft this guy. And so in our own lives, it's like, no, let me consider that. No, I made this decision in the past. This is how it ended. I got to tweak it this time. I got to learn from that. Or wait, before I do this, let me call a trusted friend, a mentor. Let me see what he thinks about this and get some insight from somebody else. And so as followers of Jesus, it's just important for us to continue to pause and consider and really dive into God's word and look, in the Bible for different, contexts and really examine, evaluate, and give serious thought to what does God's word say, and looking at different translations and some different commentaries to really grasp a perspective. And then, just some verses to consider as well. And Trip's going to jump in here. But in Hebrews 10:24, it says, and let us consider thoughtfully how we may encourage one another to love and to do good deeds. And so in our lives too, one thing is decisions. The other thing is, are we considering how we interact with others? Are we considering, how we encourage others, how we serve others, how we give to others? Or do we just not think about it? Like, we don't really consider it. We just, we live willy-nilly and we're never intentional about anything. But, this verse, hey, let us consider thoughtfully how we may encourage one another to love and to do good deeds. So I love that verse. And then, let me pause there. Trip, why don't you jump in? Any thoughts?
I love this. And as you are mentioning all of those practical ways that we institute considering sort of into our life, the thing that jumps out at me is that they take time, right? The question for me is, practically, do I set aside time to consider and to healthily evaluate my life and my heart, my relationships, my following the Lord? I think we live in a world where there are so many tools and so many technologies that allow us to outsource our thinking, allow us to outsource our considering. That's true in fantasy football. You can find a dozen fantasy football podcasts and listen to them on 2x speed, and just upload a bunch of information into your brain, but someone else is doing your thinking for you. That you can get away with that in fantasy football. You can't get away with that in life, right? To outsource your thinking and your thoughtfulness to your pastor or to Google or to Chat GPT, instead of taking some time and to set aside for consideration. Now, I do think that there are some people who have a problem with over-analysis, like they're too self-critical, right? I know we have some listeners out there who maybe spiral down into self-criticism and over-analysis. I suspect that that's not the problem for most of us in the sort of busy, fast-paced, highly tech-distracted life that we live. And there are just these practices down through time, whether that's a quiet time getting into your Bible or journaling, right? Or going on a walk, prayer walking, right? Where you're setting aside some time in your day to consider the Lord, to evaluate your life and your relationships. Every one of the practical examples you just gave is so good, but what they all involve is, can you set aside 15 minutes in the morning? Can you set aside 30 minutes at night to consider your life, the way that you're living, the values that you are pursuing, to evaluate in a healthy way?
So good. And to further that thought too, do we consider intentionally reaching out to people? And it takes effort to build relationships. And so, with our friends and family, like actually considering, all right, what encouraging word do they need today? And let me consider who I need to call today, who I need to pray for, who I need to, send a Bible verse to and help them persevere in their faith. And so it takes that pausing, that considering, that thinking. And then also, do we consider how we can show gratitude toward others, which also encourages them? Just thanking people. Like, do we consider what others have done for us and the impact that they've had on us? And, do I consider, wow, my wife made me a delicious turkey little wrap today. I got to thank her for that, right? So just, again, it sounds kind of silly or trite, but it's like we just get so busy that we forget to actually consider the things that matter, consider people, consider what people are going through, and consider the impact that we can have on people just day to day with simple things, easy things. But let's be intentional about it. Hebrews 13:7 explains another practice of considering. Remember your leaders, for it was they who brought you the word of God, and consider the result of their conduct, the outcome of their godly lives, and imitate their faith, their conviction that God exists and is the creator and ruler of all things, the provider of eternal salvation through Christ, and imitate their reliance on God with absolute trust and confidence in his power, wisdom, and goodness. And so, do we really seriously consider how leaders, mentors, pastors, with a proven track record really live? Do we observe, the fruit in their life and examine the results that they've experienced for living according to God's way and say, whew, yeah, I got to consider the tweaks and the changes that I need to make so that I can experience that fruitful life as well. Marriage, fatherhood, learning from guys that have been there, done that have a good track record. And so to parallel that to our fantasy drafts, like who's been playing fantasy for a long time, what is their draft strategy, and consider how they structure their draft and they structure their approach and how they factor in, tier-based drafting and value-based drafting and rankings and all that kind of thing. And so do we consider in our own lives leaders, pastors, people that we know, mentors, friends that have been walking the walk and following Jesus, and you can see it. It's evident. It's like, wow, yeah, his life is different, and that's a kind of marriage that I want. I know it's not perfect, but man, it looks pretty good. I want to know more. How does he do that? And so we consider that and we follow that. We examine it. So that's another, good consideration here. But any other thoughts here, Trip?
I just think in the times in my life, it's possible for me to go long stretches without being considerate, without paying attention to what I'm living for. I have gone long stretches where I'm busy and I'm distracted and I'm not attentive to the true life that Jesus has invited me to. And when you have a long stretch like that, and then you come back to considering, right? And you sit down and say, I'm going to take a few minutes to ponder, to pay attention. What always happens is a lot of the junk bubbles up to the surface. And the temptation in that moment can be to sort of freak out, to feel shame, and to think again, how could Jesus, my spouse, my friends, how could they possibly accept me with all this mess in my life? In that moment, you need to consider the cross. You need to consider Jesus. When the junk starts to bubble up, and it will, the more time that you take for consideration and prayer and meditation and just being quiet every once in a while, stuff will bubble to the surface. And what do you do with that stuff? You hand it to Jesus and say, if you didn't go to the cross for me, I would be hopeless, but you went to the cross for me. And so I have infinite, inexhaustible hope. And even if it's been months or years since the last time that I considered you, your mercies are new every morning. Your grace is super abundant, and I can come to you. So the thing that you need to, Hebrews is probably my favorite book of the Bible.
I just started reading it today. That was the next book on my list.
I love the book of Hebrews, and what Hebrews is about is paying attention to Jesus, looking at him again and again. Consider all that he has done to forgive your sin and to make you righteous, to renew your life and invite you into fullness of life. So if you don't know where to begin, set aside a few minutes and think about Christ. Think about what it meant that he went to the cross for you, what it meant that he invites you to new, true life with him. That's a good place to sort of begin your considering, because it annihilates shame and it sets us free from past failures.
So good. Consider what he's done, and then consider who we used to be before him,
right?
And who we used to be, and now to consider the transformation that has taken place in our life and the ways that he's blessed us. And so I'm just coming off a weekend, a lot of gratitude, and just considering it was my anniversary, 12 years, my daughter Maddie's 6th birthday, and just considering, man, I'm very thankful. I'm thankful for people in my life. And anyway, so it's just a celebration, but it takes some, effort of considering.
Old contemplative Christians used to have this practice called the daily examine, where every night they would sit down and they would just say, Holy Spirit, I invite you to come in and highlight what you want to highlight about this past day. They would sort of review the previous day and say, Spirit, just bring to mind what you want to highlight. And I think we can be too formal about it. If you've never done something like that before, that can feel a little bit daunting, but just to occasionally say, hey, Spirit, what do you want to show me? And then to have your Bible open in front of you, or to be in conversation with a friend. It's amazing. The Spirit will answer that prayer, and he'll highlight something about your marriage, about your fatherhood, whatever it is that he wants to show you. He loves to answer that prayer.
Amen. That's awesome. That's a great idea. That should be part of our rhythm. That's a good spiritual rhythm. Last verse to share. Haggai 1:5 in the Amplified. It says, now therefore, thus says the Lord of hosts, consider your ways and thoughtfully reflect on your conduct. Simply put, there you go. So are we willing to consider our choices, evaluate our path, observe, how we spend our time, and then reflect on any necessary changes? And so let's choose to move forward by examining our hearts, considering God's word and his leading, and then let's pick the path that he's got for us, which is victorious, and let's continue to follow Jesus. So
amen.
Let us consider. All right, there you go. That's this week's breakout here on Fantasy Football Fellowship, and all season long we'll have more breakouts. And so encourage you to check out fantasyfootballfellowship.com. Sign up for your membership today. Get your whole league to sign up as well, and participate together during league meetings. And before we get to 2 final segments, one final push, if you're just jumping in on the show, go to unpackingit.com/fantasy, and you can join a fantasy league and compete against Trip and I. So
bring it on.
It'll be fun. It'll be fun.
I defy our listeners to try to beat this. This is my season. They will not beat me. Bring it, guys.
I'm off. I feel good. I drafted one team. I still feel good about that team. A little hesitant about Jaden Reed and Devontae Adams, but the rest of the roster, I'm good. But we've got some drafts coming up. We'd love for you to compete against us. So check that out. Unpackingit.com/fantasy. All right, let's do a little game that you may see out there, but this concept of, do you want to draft this player or pass on this player? And the more I play fantasy football, the more I realize that I want to go into a draft knowing guys that I love. Guys, we'll talk about players that we're pounding the table for either next week or the week after. But it's so important to know the players that you are going to avoid. That you just know that, man, if this guy in this round, I'm passing on that guy. I don't want to draft this guy. And so it's equally important to get a sense of who to draft, but also who to pass on. Because you'll find yourself in unique situations because the draft goes crazy. It's like, whoa, this guy got drafted way early, or this guy's falling. And then you're going to find yourself in a situation, you go, am I going to take this guy or am I going to pass on this guy? So we got a few different guys kind of considering ADP. So I want to start with the Rams and Kyren Williams. If he's going off the board at RB12, you have the 28th pick. Are you passing or drafting Kyren Williams?
I mean, I guess the answer is passing. I'm gonna punt this one to you. I don't think that I have ever had Kyren Williams on any fantasy team that I've owned, whether that's redraft or like even a best ball league. I just find myself, I guess it's just every year you hear this is the year when sort of Kyren's luck runs out. I feel like I've been hearing that for the last few seasons. And now with the Stafford situation, I don't know what to think about Kyren Williams.
Well, this is only his third year, right? He hasn't been around that long, but
I think what people remember is how Sean McVay,
Todd Gurley
was willing to run Todd Gurley into the ground. And so for a while, Todd Gurley was a league winner. He was an RB1 until the moment that he wasn't, and the volume caught up to him and he was hurt all the time. Kyren Williams isn't the same guy as Todd Gurley. He doesn't have those knee issues that Gurley was always dealing with. But I just feel like every season he's been in the league, it's like, when is Kyren's luck going to run out? So I don't think I've ever had him on a team. What do you think about him?
So when it comes to the running back position, I either want the starter or the backup. And for the most part, like across my leagues, I'm going one or the other kind of as the season.
You're talking like the clear, like I want the guy who I know is going to be the workhorse clear, or I'm not going to go with one of these sort of.
No, I'm either leaning toward, hey, I think this guy's done. The normal starter's done. I'm going to go get his backup.
Gotcha.
So for example, I like Blake Corum. So if it's the Rams backfield, I would rather pass on Kyren Williams and target Blake Corum later in the draft,
right? Banking
on kind of the idea that, I don't know if Kyren does one more year. They drafted, they were in on Blake Corum. He looked good in the preseason. I like
good in stretches last year. Okay. I like that take. Yeah. Interesting.
And this goes to the next one. Here's our next player, James Conner. He's going as RB19, 51 overall. So if you're sitting at 50, 51, are you taking him or passing on James Conner?
I think I feel pretty good about James Conner as my second running back. Everything that they're saying this year at Cardinals camp is that Trey Benson is going to get more of a share of the carries. Maybe that's true. But I think as long as James Conner has been on the field, like he is a solid running back who I think he's just a really good NFL running back. So I could see his carries ticking down by a few a game to give Trey Benson some run. But I don't think that I'm as worried about Trey Benson eating into his workload as I am about some of these other sort of backup running backs. I could be way off there, but I have felt pretty good about having James Conner on my team.
All right, so I'm going the other way on him as well.
This is Benson's year.
I like Trey Benson.
Yeah.
So these are two running backs that so Kyren I'm avoiding and James Conner I'm avoiding. I'm going the backup route. Whereas in other situations, like I think in Jacksonville, I'm going Travis Etienne. Like that's the direction that I'm going in that backfield. This week. In Pittsburgh, I want Jaylen Warren. And so I feel good, about him. I think in Denver, I'm unlikely to draft RJ Harvey because I still think he's going too early, but I would pick him over J.K. Dobbins
Mm-hmm.
at this point. So appreciate people jumping in on the comments. Looks like Josh says Kyron was money last year. I'd have a hard time passing on him.
Yeah, he's always solid.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I understand
he's been
that.
great every year he's been in the league.
But I'm going Blake Corum. I like Blake Corum. All right, here's another drafter pass. In Baltimore, wide receiver Zay Flowers is going as the 27th wide receiver, 55 overall. So you're sitting there at 55. Are you taking Zay Flowers, which basically as an ARB or a wide receiver 3 flex guy, you feel good about that?
It depends on roster construction because Zay Flowers, he had weeks last week where he won you the week. He has these blow up weeks where he just looks like the most dynamic athlete on the field. I think he is a dynamic athlete. The Ravens can beat teams in so many different ways that you don't know, is this going to be a Derrick Henry week? Is this going to be a week where Lamar Jackson runs for triple-digit rushing yards? Is this a Mark Andrews week? Shoot, is this an Isaiah Likely 2-touchdown week? They can beat you in so many different ways. So I don't want like George Pickens and Zay Flowers or Jamison Williams and Zay Flowers on my team, these home run hitter guys that could score 4 points or could win you a week. But if I have two other sort of steady wide receivers and I'm going with Zay as like, my kind of third, just I want to hit a home run with this guy. I'm putting him in my third receiver slot or my flex slot, and he could win the week for me. I feel okay about him. He's not a guy that I'm targeting in drafts.
I would draft him. I would draft him sitting at that spot. I'd feel good about it. And
he's an exciting player, man. I mean,
yeah, he's young. He's in an explosive offense, and he's the clear number one guy. Rashad Bateman's an interesting kind of late round guy as well from that same team. I don't think DeAndre Hopkins has a lot left, but it'd be fun if he did, but it doesn't seem like he does. If he didn't do much, wasn't he in Kansas City last year? He didn't even do anything in Kansas City.
He was with, he's another guy who's hopping around. There are these old
that's
receivers.
Crazy. I mean, man, he fell off. Him and guy from Atlanta, Julio Jones. Those two guys, man, gosh, they fell off. AJ
when
Green.
It happens for those guys, it happens fast. I mean, Amari Cooper is still technically a free agent.
Yes.
He's waiting to see what team is going to be a Super Bowl contender. I don't think that he's on a team at the start of the season, but I do think that Amari Cooper will play at some point this season. And he might be a guy who scores 10 points one week in fantasy, but there are these older receivers who late in their career are just, they're Super Bowl shopping. And that's kind of what Hopkins, has been. So
the guy in one of my leagues, he finished last year. And so, I come in this year's draft and you got to really bounce back and have a good draft. He drafted Keenan Allen and Amari Cooper.
Right.
Good luck with that.
Yeah, good luck, man.
No,
hey,
this guy,
at least Keenan's got a team. I mean, Cooper's going to end up on a team somewhere. In best ball leagues, I've been taking him with my very last pick because I think he might end up on a team and he might have a week where he scores 14 points or something like that. But I mean, just going back to Zay Flowers. Zay Flowers, week 9 last season, he scored 27 points. The next week, he scored 5 points. Week 16, so you're in the playoffs now. He had 14 points in the first week of the playoff or the second week of the playoffs, and in your championship week, he had 3. Right, so he just like I would wager that his consistency rating is pretty low, but he can win you weeks, and so I don't want to be reliant on him to score 10, 12 points for me any given week. But he is an exciting guy to have on your team.
But he's also still this is his 3rd year, so this could be that breakout. Consistent. So
he's only
I think
24 years old.
He's worth a flyer. Yeah. I think so.
Okay, I like that.
And
talk me to Zay a little bit. I'll have Zay somewhere. Okay.
Well, again, if you draft him as a flex and then maybe he exceeds that, now you're loving life. So I think there's some potential there, which is cool. All right, last segment. We got a couple minutes left here today. We'll play a little Would You Rather. Here we go.
Get in on this. Would you rather?
That sounds good. I'll have that.
It's a good time. Do you know what I mean? This is Would You Rather.
I'm psyched.
All right, we love playing this. We kind of do this during the season as well, but we love.
Why am I the blue
in the
pill
off season
on Would You Rather? Why are you the red pill and I'm the blue pill on the Would You Rather graphic?
I didn't make it. Blame Aaron. Blame Aaron on that one. But red is my favorite color, so we'll go with that.
I like
that.
blue. Okay, all right.
So the first one here, we've got Dallas running back Javonte Williams, or here we go. Let me set it up. If you're sitting at, I'm going to give you a draft position, and you're going to tell me who you'd rather draft at that draft position. Sorry, here we go. The 114th overall pick. Okay. Would you rather have Javonte Williams or Keon Coleman?
I came into this one expecting to say Keon. The The Dallas backfield is one of those uncertain ones that I'm worried about, and nothing about Javonte Williams' performance the last two seasons since his major knee injury his rookie year. Nothing has inspired a lot of confidence. But in a situation like this, okay, so what I'm doing is I'm looking for who are the other receivers that I'm passing up on if I take Keon Williams here versus who are the running.
If you take on Keon Coleman.
Keon Coleman, yeah, excuse me. Versus, if I pass on Javonte Williams, who's a little bit ahead of Keon Coleman in overall ADP right now, what sort of running backs am I looking at when they come around? And I think there are some intriguing sort of receivers that are in the same neighborhood as Keon Coleman versus things sort of drop off for me with Javonte Williams. So I think that Javonte is going to have every opportunity to be the starter in Dallas. I'm really torn on this one. I sort of think that Keon Coleman maybe could have a little bit of a second year breakout might be too strong of a word, but could progress a little bit as a real NFL receiver.
I'm surprised at the lack of hype for Keon Coleman.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about Josh Allen. We're talking about Buffalo having a great season, and the running back situation, which we'll get to in a moment. But James Cook sitting out, I think they'll throw more. And Shakir had a nice year, but Coleman's the guy they went out and drafted to be the guy. And let's give him a shot to go do that this year. And I'm banking that he does. He's got
amazing,
the size. He's got the athleticism.
Right. Yeah. I think he's probably the Bills receiver that I would want to own if I own a Bills receiver. What's amazing about Josh Allen is that he could be the QB1 overall this season and no one would bat an eye. And you could imagine a scenario where none of his skill players, none of the pass catchers on his team are in like the top 15 to 20 at their position. Dalton Kincaid notwithstanding, because tight end's sort of a one position. But the way that Josh Allen wins, he spreads the ball around, he runs the ball. So the Bills offense will be great. And you could imagine a scenario where they have an incredible offense and you don't really feel good week to week about owning any of their skill players, So it's a difficult offense to predict. And so I think maybe I go Javonte.
All right, I'm thinking Keon Coleman there. All right, the next one. You're sitting at 123 overall. Are you taking Brandon Ayuk or Darnell Mooney? Both injured right now.
Yeah, that's what makes this hard. Again, I think I'm going to go Mooney. I'm a little bit more worried about Ayuk's injury.
They're saying Mooney. 6 weeks at the moment. That's what they're saying.
Yeah, and what do they say?
He'll miss 6 weeks. Ayuk will miss 6 weeks.
Mooney maybe misses week 1 or something like that. He might be back in time for the start of the season. I think I'm going Mooney there. It's possible that in the second half of the season, the way that the 49ers season has gone, Ayuk comes back and he's reasonably healthy and they just really need him to be an important part of their offense. So I could see regretting this one later in the season, but I think, again, I want to go into the year with a guy who I think might start week 1.
All right. So at this point, you're drafting like a wide receiver 4 on your roster. So potentially somebody you'd like to have on a flex. So I'm very clear about this. I don't like drafting players who are already injured, that I already know are going to miss time. I prefer not to have them on my roster. But this late in the draft, I'm willing to consider Brandon Ayuk there. And if I can kind of say, okay, if he's going to miss 6 weeks, then we're getting into bye weeks. Now I'm going to need somebody at that point. So I can survive the first 6 weeks because I've got 3 other stud wide receivers.
Yeah.
Then I'm willing to consider it. So it just depends on how strong and how confident I am in my wide receivers at that point. But the thing with Darnell Mooney is I would rather have, of course, I'd rather have Drake London, but that's who I want in Atlanta is Drake London, not necessarily Mooney. Mooney was great last year because he was a surprise. This year, injured, not as much a surprise. Does he have the chemistry with Penix? I don't know. Yeah. So anyway. Yeah.
And you feel much better about, Purdy is just unquestionably a great really good NFL quarterback. The jury's still out on Penix. So
yes.
I don't know what to think about that.
And that's still a messy situation with Cousins. All right, we'll do 2.
You think Cousins is good? Okay.
Yeah, I don't know what he's not even going to play in preseason. I mean, I don't know what they're doing.
Okay.
I would think you'd want to play him and get a feel for what he's got and try to trade him.
Yeah, I think they're going to trade him. Yeah. I don't even think they're going to play him. They're going to wait for some team who's gets quarterback desperate and so
trade him.
Yeah.
All right.
The Rams.
Two more. Oh, that's true. Oh, that's that. Wow. I haven't heard that.
Yeah. Stafford's going to get surgery and Cousins is going to lead him to a Super Bowl.
Wow, let that set in.
What a narrative.
Ooh, that's fun. I feel like they're kind of invested in Garoppolo, but
Yeah.
if Garoppolo stinks, that could definitely be
an interesting turn of events.
Ooh, that's intriguing. All right. Now I know Kirk was bad last year, but we still have to give him a little time to get over the Achilles.
Yeah, the Achilles. Yeah, that's a tough injury for a guy his age. Yeah. Okay. Let's go to this next one because this one's easy for me.
Okay, we'll go really fast. You don't even have to give your reasons, but Ray Davis or Dylan Sampson, 153 overall.
Ray Davis, not even close.
Yeah, I'd go Ray Davis too. But Dylan Sampson's somewhat intriguing. But yeah, you got to go Ray Davis there. All right, Chase Brown or Trey McBride, 25th overall. You going for your one of the top tight ends?
I would feel really excited to have Chase Brown as my running back 2 this year. And I think that I could feel good about having him as my RB1.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think the Bengals offense is going to be, or defense is going to be terrible. The offense is going to be prolific. And I think last year was just a sort of a preview of how good Chase Brown can be. So I'm much more interested in getting a strong running back in that 25, that sort of second, third round turn. Then I'm thinking about tight end. If McBride slips a few spots past this, it would be so fun to have him as your tight end. He probably will be one of the 3 best tight ends this season. But I want to lock down a running back here as opposed to tight end. And I think there's some values to be had at tight end later in the draft this year. I kind of always feel that way, but I'm taking Chase Brown here.
I agree. And Chase Brown is starting to get on the hype train for sure. But I'm a big Chase Brown guy. I was last year. I picked him instead of Zach Moss. That was my guy. So I'm excited about him again this year. It just should continue. I'm actually surprised that it's taken this long for people to kind of realize, wait, this guy's really good and had an unbelievable season. But I like the mid-tier tight ends. Tight ends kind of 4 through 9. I'm good with any of those guys that I can get at the right spot in the draft.
Same way. Yep.
Versus really having to go and get one of the top 3 tight ends, because then you're expecting a lot. They got to deliver. Whereas I like the value late. So there you go. A little would you rather. So that's this week's show. Glad to be with you. Thanks everybody listening live. Thanks everybody listening later on Spotify or Apple or YouTube. Glad to have you a part of the show today. Always appreciate the comments. When you like and share and rate, review, all of that helps us out. So we're grateful. Again, check out fantasyfootballfellowship.com. Sign up for your free membership today. And we will talk to you next week here on the show, Lord willing. For Trip, I'm Bryce. I'm a sports fan who follows Jesus. I believe in the good news that he died on the cross for my sin. He was resurrected, and through faith, I've been saved by his grace. I hope that is true for you as well, and I hope you'll join me as we live life as sports fans who follow Jesus together. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk to you next time right here on the Fantasy Football Fellowship Podcast.